Israel-Hamas conflict. The conflict between Israel and Hamas is a complex issue that has persisted for decades. This conflict includes historical, political, religious, and humanitarian issues between Israel and Palestine. In May 2021, this conflict flared up again, causing significant casualties and drawing international attention. Let's take a closer look at the background of the war, key events, international reactions, and the impact of the conflict. 1. Background of the war. 1.1 Historical background. The conflict between Israel and Palestine began in the early 20th century, with the fall of the Ottoman Empire. After World War I, the British took control of the region, and tensions between Jews and Arabs grew. In 1948, Israel declared independence, leading to war with neighboring Arab countries, which resulted in decades of conflict. The Gaza Strip has been a focal point of this conflict, serving as a major stage for Israeli occupation and Palestinian resistance. Palestinians have continuously fought for the establishment of an independent state, and despite numerous clashes and negotiations, the conflict persists today. 1.2 Emergence of Hamas. Hamas, an Islamic fundamentalist organization, was formed during the First Intifada Palestinian uprising in 1987. Hamas rejects the existence of Israel and aims for the liberation of Palestine through armed struggle. It promotes a society based on Islamic values and emphasizes resistance and struggle over peace negotiations with Israel. In the 2006 Gaza elections, Hamas won and took control of the Gaza Strip, leading to increased political division within Palestine and intensified conflict with Israel. Since Hamas took power, multiple violent clashes have occurred, making Gaza a central point of an international humanitarian crisis. 1.3 Clashes between Gaza and Israel. After Hamas took control of Gaza in 2006, tensions with Israel escalated. Hamas continued rocket attacks and tunnel infiltrations into Israel, leading Israel to impose economic blockades and intensify military operations in Gaza. Israel conducted several large-scale military operations to curb Hamas's armed activities and protect against threats from Gaza, resulting in increased civilian casualties and a deepening humanitarian crisis. Despite these pressures, Hamas continued rocket attacks on Israeli cities. This cycle of violence persisted despite international mediation efforts, with the conflict remaining unresolved to this day. 2. Outbreak of the war and key events. 2.1 Outbreak of the 2021 war. In May 2021, tensions escalated with the forced eviction of Palestinian homes in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood of East Jerusalem and clashes at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. These incidents led Hamas to launch numerous rockets at Israel. In response, Israel launched large-scale airstrikes on Gaza, causing significant casualties and infrastructure damage. The clashes drew serious concern from the international community, with many countries and organizations calling for a ceasefire and peace. However, the violence continued for weeks, exacerbating the humanitarian crisis. This conflict highlighted the enduring challenges of resolving the long-standing Israel-Palestine conflict. 2.2 Early stages of the war. In the early stages of the war, Hamas launched thousands of rockets at Israeli cities. Israel intercepted most of these rockets with its Iron Dome defense system, but some rockets hit urban areas, causing casualties. In response, Israel conducted large-scale airstrikes on Gaza, targeting Hamas's military facilities and civilian infrastructure, leading to significant casualties and property damage. The clashes resulted in the destruction of many homes and public facilities in Gaza, worsening the humanitarian crisis. The international community called for an immediate ceasefire and humanitarian aid, but the war continued for weeks, causing great suffering to civilians. This conflict deepened the need for a long-term peaceful resolution. 2.3 Major battles and incidents. Major battles in Gaza involved Israeli airstrikes targeting Hamas's rocket launchers and tunnel networks. Hamas used tactics of hiding rocket launchers in civilian areas, using civilians as shields. This led to many civilian casualties, drawing strong condemnation from the international community. Israeli airstrikes aimed at Hamas's military infrastructure also caused significant damage to civilian buildings and infrastructure, resulting in numerous deaths and injuries. The international community condemned the violence from both sides and demanded an immediate ceasefire and humanitarian assistance. Despite these calls, the fighting continued, causing immense suffering for Gaza residents and highlighting the deep and complex nature of the Israel-Hamas conflict. 2.4 International reactions. Western nations recognize Israel's right to self-defense, but urged minimizing civilian casualties. The United States maintained strong support for Israel, providing defense systems and military aid. The Biden administration emphasized Israel's right to self-defense, while urging caution to reduce civilian harm. The European Union (EU) also recognized Israel's right to defend itself, but called for restraint from both sides and emphasized a peaceful resolution. Middle Eastern countries generally expressed support for Palestine. Iran, in particular, actively supported Hamas and maintained a hostile stance toward Israel. Iran provided weapons and funds to Hamas, emphasizing Palestinian resistance. UN and international organizations' response. The United Nations called for an immediate ceasefire and emphasized international efforts to minimize civilian casualties. The UN Human Rights Council condemned both Israeli military operations and Hamas's rocket attacks, establishing a commission to investigate possible war crimes. 2.5 Humanitarian crisis. The war forced many Palestinians in Gaza to flee. According to the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA, hundreds of thousands of people lost their homes and moved to temporary shelters. This worsened the already dire humanitarian situation in Gaza. Many refugees lacked basic necessities and medical services, facing harsh living conditions in overcrowded temporary shelters. The war caused numerous civilian deaths and injuries. Israeli airstrikes destroyed residential areas, schools, and hospitals in Gaza, while Hamas rocket attacks harmed Israeli civilians. In Gaza, countless homes were destroyed or severely damaged, forcing residents to flee, and healthcare and educational facilities were disrupted, halting basic community services. The war severely impacted Gaza's economy. Major infrastructure was destroyed. Commercial activities halted and unemployment surged. Airstrikes significantly damaged roads, power grids, and water facilities, crippling economic activities. This economic loss worsened living standards, leading to poverty and food insecurity. 2.6 Political and military impact of the war. The war triggered political changes within Palestine. Hamas sought to strengthen its influence within Palestine through this war. By engaging in armed conflict, Hamas aimed to position itself as a symbol of resistance against Israel, expanding its support base within Palestine. The war prompted political changes within Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu sought to strengthen his political position through the war, emphasizing security through a strong response against Hamas to solidify his support base. However, civilian casualties and international criticism during the war intensified internal opposition. The war brought significant changes to international politics. The United States and European countries aim to promote peace negotiations between Israel and Palestine for stability in the Middle East. 2.7 Long-term outlook of the war. The likelihood of the war ending soon seems low. The fundamental conflict between Israel and Hamas remains unresolved, with both sides determined to achieve their goals through military confrontation. Israel aims to suppress Hamas's armed activities and enhance national security, while Hamas continues its resistance against Israel. For Palestinian independence, efforts for peace negotiations continue, but differences in positions between the two sides complicate the process. Israel and Hamas have conflicting goals and demands, making it difficult to reach an agreement. Israel emphasizes national security and the disarmament of Hamas, while Hamas demands Palestinian independence and expanded autonomy. Post-war, the reconstruction and recovery of Gaza will be a major challenge. The international community is expected to provide various economic and technical support for Gaza's reconstruction. Organizations like the United Nations, European Union, and numerous NGOs will offer financial aid and technical assistance for rebuilding infrastructure, housing, medical, and educational services. Additionally, efforts to heal the wounds of war and achieve social integration are necessary. This includes mental and psychological support for local residents, achieved through social programs and education for community cohesion, strengthening support for youth and vulnerable groups, and promoting job creation and small business support for economic recovery are crucial. Transparent and efficient fund management is essential in Gaza's reconstruction and recovery, along with continuous international attention and support. The goal is to help Gaza residents achieve stable living conditions and sustainable development. Conclusion: the Israel-Hamas conflict is a significant issue, drawing considerable international attention. This war results from a complex interplay of historical, political, and economic factors, causing substantial changes in international order.
A mile-long terrorist tunnel route has been uncovered in eastern Rafah with dozens of anti-tank missiles and weapons inside. The Israel Defense Forces providing the details along with this video right here on your screen. Now, the IDF saying a tunnel shaft was located just feet away from the Rafah crossing, branching off into several different routes with several blast doors and a hideout. Do want to bring in Josh Haston, a Middle East correspondent for Jewish News Syndicate, joining us now live to talk more about all of this. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thanks so much, Josh.
All right, so first off, can you explain the significance overall of this discovery there in eastern Rafah? Because the images released by the IDF pretty much say a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So here you have one of many terror tunnels which have been discovered over the course of the last 7 months. And this one is especially significant because the IDF is committed towards wiping out the remaining 4 battalions of Hamas, which are located in Rafah, which is alongside the Egyptian border. Now, they found anti-tank missiles, they found grenades, AK-47s, all sorts of equipment, in addition to the fact that there's an actual tunnel there, which Hamas uses time and time again in order to pop out of the ground and take on Israeli soldiers. So a very significant discovery. I think this will lead to a more successful mission by the IDF in Rafah now that these weapons have been seized, these weapon caches have been taken, and the fact that this tunnel has been discovered, which can no longer be operational in targeting Israeli troops who are trying to finish this war and destroy Hamas once and for all for the sake of Israel and for the sake of humanity.
And it does sound as though dozens upon dozens of, really hundreds of tunnel shafts have been found all across Gaza, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. This is time and time again. We've been finding this. Hamas has been working on this for years. The biggest mistake Israel made was leaving Gaza in 2005, which essentially had provided no eyes on the ground when the IDF pulled out and Israel pulled out all its citizens. So Hamas has been using all of these years to develop this essentially an underground city for terrorism. This isn't a city to protect their citizens. Their citizens are on the front lines, and Hamas hides behind their citizens time and time again, committing the double war crime of attacking Israel, hiding behind their own people, and creating this underground network, which is hundreds of kilometers, hundreds of miles long, in order to attack Israel.
And I do want to talk about another piece of breaking news that we are following at this hour, as 2 Israeli soldiers were told have died after a car ramming attack near the West Bank. The military announcing the deaths of the soldiers a short time ago, both of them 20 years old. What do we know about this attack overall? Do we have a lot of information just yet?
위톱 성분을 보시면 헬리코박터균을 억제해서 속쓰림, 소화불량, 위산 역류를 해결할 수 있습니다. 오늘은 위톱에 대해서 살펴볼 건데요. 위톱에는 스페인 감초 추출 이외에도 실종 건강기능식품인데요. 그중 살펴볼 것은 스페인 감초 추출물입니다. 살펴보는 방법으로는 식품안전나라에서 검색을 해보면 되는데요. 검색을 해보면 위 점막 내 헬리코박터균 증식을 억제하고 위 점막을 보호해 위 건강에 도움을 줄 수 있음을 인정받았습니다. 그리고 인체 적용 시험한 결과 기능성 소화장애, NDI 항목
Severe Infantry Brigade, which is the largest brigade of infantry in the IDF, and they were attacked by an Arab who came out of what I understand the Arab-controlled, PA-controlled town of Tulkarm. He rammed them with his truck. And unfortunately, overnight, these 2 soldiers died. The terrorists then fled into the neighboring PA-controlled town of Nablus or Shechem, where apparently he turned himself over to the Palestinian Authority. Now, is Israel going to get their hands on this terrorist? That remains to be seen. But from what I understand, the PA is now watching over this terrorist. But we've seen the PA's revolving door for many, many years, taking in terrorists and then just letting them go just a few days later. So, and as far as I'm concerned, this man is still on the loose. The PA continues to support terrorists. They still operate their pay-to-slay program, which the U.S. Congress passed a law against funding the Palestinian Authority. As long as they operate this program, which incentivizes Arabs to go out and murder Jews, whether they're soldiers or civilians. So unfortunately, 2 soldiers, it's all part of the war in Gaza. It's all the same. It's just a different front, the front of Judea and Samaria. And of course, you have the northern border and everything going on in Gaza. So very, very sad day today. 2 soldiers there, and then an additional soldier was killed fighting against Hamas in Gaza as well, a paratrooper, if I'm not mistaken.
Israel saying that it has gained control, seized control of a pretty important corridor. Can you tell me about the corridor, where it's located, I believe, over at the Gaza-Egypt border?
Yeah, this is known as the Philadelphia corridor. It's an 8.7-mile road, essentially, from east to west, west to east, which is the buffer between Hamas-controlled Gaza and Egypt. Israel used to control, before 2005, used to control that very highly essential, important road. In 2005, Israel turned it over to the Palestinian Authority, and then Hamas initiated their violent coup in 2007. So you have Hamas on one side in Gaza, you have Egypt supposed to be in control on the other side. And many, many years ago, Egypt actually did take important steps in order to stop to block those tunnels, even flooded some of those tunnels coming from Egypt into Gaza, which provide weapons and supplies to Hamas. Unfortunately, in the last couple of years, we've seen that Egypt has been extremely lax about it, and those tunnels have existed, and Israel has destroyed many of those tunnel shafts. And the importance, again, of the Philadelphia corridor is Israel can maintain a presence on the ground between Gaza and Egypt in case a terrorist pops up in that area. They can take them out. If they find more tunnel shafts, Israel will then have the ability and the authority to go ahead and destroy those tunnels. So a very significant piece of real estate there separating Gaza and Egypt, which is now, from what I understand, as of yesterday, under full Israeli control. Very significant.
Israel's national security advisor making comments that are circulating now all over social media. There's been a lot of questions after he did say essentially that the war could go on for at least 7 more months. So my question for you, is that any different than what's been said all along? And why are these comments so significant, so important? Why are so many people talking about the comments?
Well, I think this is in line with Prime Minister Netanyahu, who told the Israeli people that 2024 would be a year of war for Israel, and Israel must go full force and destroy Hamas as long as it takes. So that's number one. Number two, the comments in terms of Minister Hanegbi. Obviously, he has inside information, but I think he's preparing the general public to know that this is not an operation that's going to take overnight. We have to have patience. A lot of people have had enough, understandably. I mean, Israel has been at war for nearly 8 months, and I think he's trying to reassure the Israeli public, actually put a date on the end of the war. Again, I don't have that insight and intelligence that the minister has, that he's obtaining from the IDF directly, but I think he's trying to assure the Israeli public that there will be an end to this war, and Israel will achieve those three goals, which the minister said. Number one, destroying Hamas. Number two, bringing back our hostages, having them physically being released through force, which Hamas is holding in those tunnels and in the dungeons of Gaza. And at the same time, number three is ensuring that Gaza is no longer a threat to the state of Israel. So I think he's putting somewhat of a timeline on that. We'll see if Israel sticks to that timeline, but those three goals must be met. Hamas must be eradicated, as I said before, not only for Israel, but for all of Western civilization.
And we talked a bit earlier about the 2 Israeli soldiers that were killed in that car ramming attack, but we also know that 3 Israeli soldiers were killed over in a booby-trapped building over in Rafah during the operation there. Would you say that that kind of shows the dangers that Israel and the troops in general, maybe civilians as well, are dealing with in Rafah?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Hamas is an organization, a terrorist organization, obviously sponsored by Iran. The Iranian octopus is at the top of all the terror organizations: Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. And this is how they fight. They booby-trap buildings. They place arms within civilian populations. They don't wear uniforms. This is not a military versus a military. This is a military versus an organization that dresses as civilians. So it's extremely difficult for Israel to identify who is who, whether they are simply civilians. And I use that term loosely because many of those civilians in Gaza did participate in the October 7th massacre. But the IDF must, in a moment's notice, in the field, designate who is a civilian and who is a terrorist. And unfortunately, in this case, another booby-trapped building. It's not the first time that it's happened, but Israel has to take all the precautions necessary. We've used the elite canine units in the past to go into these buildings to ensure that they are not booby-trapped. And unfortunately, in this case, 3 soldiers lost their lives in one of these structures.
What do you make of the IDF's initial comments after we saw that strike Sunday over in Rafah that reportedly killed dozens of Palestinian civilians there? What do you make of the comments that it was actually a secondary explosion and it may have been caused by a Hamas weapons warehouse in that area?
I have no doubt that the truth will come out, and it will be revealed to the world that in fact was a secondary explosion. The IDF has made it clear that the precise target, using low-grade munitions, took out 2 master terrorists. These were evil, evil people. It was a direct strike on their position. And then there were these secondary explosions. And I predicted this several days ago, and now it's coming to light that Hamas is maniacally hiding their weapons and their rockets within civilian populations. You had recorded conversations between people in Gaza saying, oh, we know that this is where Hamas is hiding their weapons. The truth will come to light. If you remember, towards the beginning of the war, there was a Hamas rocket which landed short, and people were killed near a hospital in northern Gaza. Immediately, the international community accused Israel of carrying out the strike, and then video evidence and other evidence showed that this was in fact a Hamas rocket which landed short. So I have no doubt in my mind that Hamas